What caught my attention is the salary transparency. If you are based in a low-cost country like South Africa, Namibia, Nigeria, etc., on average, they are paying around 38,000 euros per year or 64,000 rands per month. If you're in a mid-cost country like Spain or Portugal, they are paying around 48,000 euros per year. And in high-cost countries like Germany or the Netherlands, they are paying around 70,000 euros per year. And that's just the average base. They actually go even deeper with the structured tiers depending on your level of experience, from entry level all the way to senior roles. You can see how you progress or how you can progress whether you have zero experience or a few years experience. They even have internships, which is much lower than this. What makes this company even more interesting, the base salary is just the starting point. On top of that, they offer uncapped quarterly bonuses, annual profit sharing, consistent salary increase over time, 4-day work week, and even paid sabbaticals. Having worked in Europe and still do in some ways, especially Germany, I can tell you this kind of employee-first culture is very real. Companies there genuinely invest in their people even when you are working remotely. But what's the trap? One thing you must know, this is not easy money. When a company offers this kind of salary and flexibility, they are expecting a lot from you. And this company is no different. Their hiring process is extremely selective, which is why this video is this long, because I went deep. So what exactly are they looking for? How can you better position yourself to stand out? And most importantly, what are the questions they're going to be asking you and how can you answer those questions? The name of the company is Product People and they hire product managers. When you hear the title product manager, it can mean different things depending on the industry. In simple terms, product managers are responsible for deciding what should be built, why it matters, and making sure teams actually deliver. You sit between the business, the customer, and the technical teams building the product. But not all product managers work inside one company long term. Some specialize in stepping into organizations more like consultants, and that's how this company called Product People operates. Product People will virtually send you on interim missions, usually lasting between 3 to 12 months before starting a new project. During that mission, you become part of the client's team and work on high impact problems that the company doesn't currently have the capacity or expertise to solve. Some of their clients include companies like eBay, Apple, World Health Organization, etc. Just by looking at the clientele, I hope you see why their hiring process is extremely selective. To understand what this job entails or what it actually looks like, because you cannot tailor your CV if you don't understand, let's look at a real project that Product People worked on with a client called TIA Mobility, one of Europe's leading shared micromobility companies. TIA operate electric scooters and e-bikes that people unlock through a mobile app and use to move around cities. Prior to working with Product People, this company grew incredibly fast after launching, reaching 1 million rides within 6 months, and they expanded to more than 180 cities across Europe. But that kind of growth came with complex challenges. One of the biggest issues cities faced with shared scooters was parking. Riders often left scooters anywhere, think sidewalks, crowded areas, etc. And this created clutter and safety concerns. Cities began introducing strict rules. In places like Paris, scooters had to be parked only in designated areas approved by the city. But even that created a new problem. Those zones quickly became overcrowded as dozens of scooters piled into the same place. This is where Product People's interim product managers stepped in. Their mission was to help TIA build a product solution that satisfied regulators while keeping operations efficient. Before Product People involvement, managing overcrowded parking zones required employees of this client, which is TIA, to physically drive around the city and manually move scooters to other locations. The issue with this, it was expensive and difficult to scale as the company expanded into more cities. What the Product People team did was to design a feature. The system monitored how many scooters were already parked in each designated zone. If a location reached its limits, riders could no longer end their trip there. The app would guide them to the nearest zones with available parking space. If you look at the product alone or the feature, it may sound simple, but coming with that idea and helping the client build required coordination across multiple teams of the client. Engineers had to build a system that tracked scooters' capacity in real time. Designers had to create an interface that explained parking rules clearly to riders. Operation teams had to ensure the system didn't create bottlenecks elsewhere in the city. And product managers, which will be your job if you apply and get hired, had to align with all those teams while making sure the solution met regulatory requirements. You may wonder, why am I sharing this backstory? I want you to really understand the kind of work you'll be doing before you start the application, especially if you have no experience. But even with experience, the title product manager is broad and it means something different for different companies. Within this company, your role as a product manager will be to translate complex real-world problems into solutions. At Product People, just because I used an example of the work they did for one client doesn't mean you will always be supporting building of features. Sometimes you'll have to step into companies, aka Product People clients, where teams are misaligned and you have to help them rebuild their entire product roadmap. In other cases, you may be working with clients, focusing on product discovery, running user research, etc. Now that we've looked at the type of work that Product People does, what kind of candidates are they looking for? If you read the job description, the language can sound very broad. Things like solve problems, bring clarity to chaos. But each of those phrases point to very specific skills and behaviors they expect from you. The first thing they say they are looking for is someone who can solve problems for clients and for product people. In practice, this means being able to step into a situation where priorities are unclear and quickly figure out what actually matters. It also means being comfortable switching between strategy and execution. Another requirement they emphasize is the ability to work with strong personalities and diverse teams. When you enter a company as an interim product manager sent by Product People, you are stepping into a team that already exists and they may already have strong opinions about what should happen next. For you to succeed in such an environment, you must have strong communication skills, but also be able to adapt your communication style to different stakeholders or different teams. Product People usually works with companies that already have a functioning product and customer base. So the challenges are less about inventing a product and more about improving it, expanding it, or organizing teams so that they can move faster. This is important to remember and understand. Another key expectation is the ability to craft and communicate compelling product narratives. This means being able to clearly explain why a product feature exists and why it matters. In their job description, they also emphasize the ability to move from one mission to another every few months. After completing a project for one client, as the product manager, you may be moved to a completely different company, industry, or product. So you must be someone who doesn't mind change. But how do you position yourself for a role like this, especially if you've never worked as a product manager before or haven't worked at all? This is important because Product People hire across different tiers. Some roles require experienced product managers, but they also have roles where no experience or direct product management experience is required. They even have an intern tier. In such cases, they highlighted on their website that they are looking for people who can show they understand how to think about products and solve problems in a structured way. This is why I spent time on the last sections. It may seem like a lot of information at first, but I need you to understand the details if you want to get hired by this company. You may not have a product manager title yet, but that doesn't mean you can't start building evidence that you think like a product manager. Product People encourages everyone to apply even without experience, provided you can demonstrate you have the qualities they care about. And one of the most effective ways you can do this is by analyzing real products. When you analyze an app or a service or a physical product, you want to train yourself to think like a product manager, and I'll guide you through it. Before starting your application, start by picking a product you already use. This could be something like Uber, Spotify, Netflix, Airbnb, etc. When you break down the product, there are a few things you should look for. Instead of saying this feature would be cool, analyze the product through a structured lens. There are 4 key questions I recommend you ask. Number 1, what core problem is the product solving? 2, who are the primary users? 3, what does the user journey look like? And 4, where does friction happen in that journey? Once you identify the friction, then you propose a practical improvement, writing it down in your notes, that directly addresses that issue. This is what you will use in your CV as a case study. Let's look at Uber, for example. Uber solves the problem of finding reliable transportation quickly. Who is the primary user? There are actually 2 main user groups: riders and drivers. Each group has different needs and motivations. 3, to analyze the user journey. In this case, it would mean looking at what happens from the moment a user opens the app to the moment they complete the task. For example, in Uber, the journey includes opening the app, selecting a destination, seeing price estimates, requesting a ride, and tracking the driver. But where is the friction? Or what are the pain points or areas where the experience could be improved? During busy periods, as riders, we usually face long wait times. This has happened to me a lot, actually, and probably it has happened to you. It's because sometimes or during peak hours, there are not enough drivers in certain areas. What I've noticed is Uber already uses surge pricing to incentivize drivers. That's why during peak times the prices are really high for the rider, and it's more like an incentive for the driver to move toward high demand areas, but drivers usually don't see demand changes early enough to reposition themselves. As a product manager placed virtually by product people at Uber offices, you could introduce a predictive demand heat map for drivers that shows potential demand surges maybe 15 to 30 minutes using historical data and real-time signals. This would allow drivers to reposition themselves proactively instead of reacting after the surge pricing appears. In turn, this could significantly reduce rider wait times and increase driver earnings while improving marketplace balance. So with this case study, I went through the 4 points or the 4 questions. Before showing you how to add this or include something like this in your CV, let's look at another example. Example number 2, Netflix. Most of us use Netflix and it's amazing in many ways. But the problem is, while Netflix solves the core problem of boredom and accessibility to international movies or shows, we spend a lot of time browsing before choosing something to watch. Sometimes we give up and exit the app, or at least I do. And that's because the large catalog can be overwhelming sometimes, especially when you open the app without a specific show or movie in mind. So as a product manager, placed by product people at Netflix, you could maybe introduce a mood-based viewing mode where users can select moods such as light and funny or background watching. The system would then temporarily reorganize the homepage to prioritize content that matches that mood rather than relying only on algorithmic history. This could in turn reduce browsing time and increase content engagement. I went through the second example much faster to save time, but I hope you get the point. I took some time to really think about real examples and put myself in your shoes, so you can also come up with examples that make sense and be able to break them down using the 4 key questions. Also include this in your CV once you've done 2 or 3 of these product breakdowns. Under experience or skills section, include something like this. Pause to read or take a screenshot. You can then add another section where you describe the case study in 4 steps as we did earlier to give more details and context. Companies hiring entry-level product talent or product managers are not expecting you to have launched major features yet. What they are evaluating is how you think. If you can clearly identify problems, analyze user behavior, and propose thoughtful improvements, you are already demonstrating the same mindset product managers use when making real product decisions. If you are experienced already, employers are not just looking for potential. They want to see evidence that you can solve real product problems and drive outcomes even if it's not from the same industry. So the way you present your experience, if you have it, needs to show impact and ownership. A common mistake someone with experience might make is writing your CV like this. These statements describe activities, but they don't show what actually changed because of your work. What you want to do is to structure your experience around problem solved and outcomes achieved. The way you list your skills or experience cannot be the same as someone without any experience. So instead of writing worked on improving the onboarding workflow, you could structure it like this. Many years of experience doesn't automatically equate to high chances of getting hired. Some of you are highly experienced and highly educated but can't sell yourself. Now you know what a product manager does at this company, what is expected of you, how to demonstrate your skills or experience in your CV. Of course, include the rest of important information in your CV. If you have never written a CV before or you don't know how to, I have a dedicated video for that. Now let's do the application. Product people emphasized very strongly on their website that they pay close attention to how candidates answer the questions on their application. They also mentioned that they are not just checking if you have the right experience, but looking at how you think about products, problems, and decisions. So how you answer the questions we are about to go through and how you structure your skills or case studies as we just did matters a lot. I went through these questions and spent even more time to really put myself in the shoes of someone who won this job. My hope is to help guide your thinking. Hopefully, you will do even better than this. I covered what I would consider strong answers, why the answer is strong, and what I would consider weak answers and why it's weak. Question 1. Why product people? Someone who skipped all the previous parts because they seemed too long would not be able to answer this question. A strong answer without any experience. This is what I would say. What stands out about product people is that you position product managers as problem solvers rather than only roadmap managers. In many organizations, teams focus on building features or adding new things when the underlying problem isn't clear. Your model seemed designed for situations where the problem itself needs to be diagnosed. That appeals to me because the most interesting part of product work is not deciding what to build, but identifying the constraints that is preventing the product or team from moving forward. The idea of stepping into environments where priorities are unclear and helping teams reframe the problem aligns with how I naturally approach complex systems. Notice how I took from the job description. Another strong answer, but experienced. What attracts me to product people is the emphasis on impact over ownership. Most in-house roles reward long-term ownership over a roadmap or a feature building, but the consulting model requires identifying leverage points quickly. That requires the ability to separate symptoms from root causes and focus teams on the few decisions that actually change outcomes. Type of environments you describe on your website, fast-growing companies dealing with regulatory changes, scaling challenges, or stalled initiatives are exactly where that kind of thinking matters most. Both these answers show focus on diagnosing problems, interest in high-impact work, comfort with messy environments. A weak answer, whether you have experience or not, could look like this. I'm interested in product people because I'm looking for a role where I can grow my career and gain exposure to different companies and industries. Why is this weak? It focuses mainly on career interest, not problem-solving capabilities. Question 2. Pick a digital product you love and frequently use. What would you remove? Why? Clarify any metrics or methods you would use to validate your decision. A strong answer with no experience. Product, YouTube. Side note, I chose this because I love and study this app. You can pick any product. One feature I would consider removing or at least significantly reduce is the number of recommended videos shown immediately after a video finishes. While recommendations help discovery, the current experience often push users into passive viewing rather than intentional viewing. For example, after finishing a video, the autoplay recommendation often starts before the user has had time to decide what actually they want to watch watch next. This may increase session duration, but could reduce user satisfaction because the viewing experience becomes less intentional. To validate whether removing or delaying autoplay improves the experience, I would do an experiment where the next video does not start automatically, but instead shows a short decision screen allowing the user to either play the recommendation or return to search. The metrics I would use to examine include session duration, user-initiated video selections, exit rate after autoplay begins, return visits within the next 24 hours. If autoplay increases session length but reduces return visits or intentional selections, it may indicate the feature is optimizing short-term engagement rather than long-term satisfaction. Why is this answer strong? In my opinion, obviously. This answer demonstrates a couple of things. 1. Understanding trade-offs. Autoplay increases engagement but may reduce intentional viewing. 2. Awareness of business metrics. 3. My validation method proposes testing rather than guessing. This is how a company like Product People expect you to reason. Of course, it could be better, and you may not have enough space to write such a detailed answer, but everything can be summarized. I kept the details for explaining purposes. It's not about writing the longest answer, but clear thought process. Another strong answer, but with experience. Product LinkedIn. One feature I would consider removing or limiting is the automated milestone posts, such as celebrate a work anniversary notifications in the feed. While these posts increase posting frequency, they may dilute the informational value of the feed. If the feed becomes dominated by automated posts rather than meaningful professional updates, users may start to ignore feed content altogether. To evaluate this, I would analyze engagement per impression across different post types, scroll depth in the feed, ratio of meaningful interactions, comments versus shares, and passive reactions. If milestone posts generate high impressions but low meaningful engagement compared to organic posts, it may be suggesting that they add noise rather than value. A potential experiment I would do would be moving milestone posts to a separate notification section rather than the main feed. I would evaluate the impact by measuring overall feed engagement quality, time spent in the feed, frequency of meaningful interactions per session. Why this is strong? It shows product judgment understanding, which is content quality versus engagement inflation. 2. Data thinking, focusing on interaction quality, not just the impressions. 3. Experiment design, because I would be moving milestone posts to a separate section rather than removing them outright. A weak answer could be product Instagram. I would remove ads from Instagram because they interrupt the user experience. Why this is weak? It ignores the business model. Ads are how Instagram makes money. As a strong product manager, you must always consider user value and business sustainability. So you have to optimize trade-offs, not remove revenue streams. Question 3. Share a moment in your career that made you realize you'd excel as a product consultant rather than an in-house PM, and how it aligns with Product People's principles. If you don't have any experience, this question may scare you up, but think of a real-life example like this. I literally made this up, and this is something that can be an actual lived experience. Here's how I would answer without any work experience. A moment that made me realize I might enjoy product consulting happened while living in a shared apartment with several roommates. Everyone was consistently complaining about how the kitchen was always messy. People simply weren't cleaning up after themselves. Instead of focusing on who was responsible, I started paying attention to when the mess actually happened or appeared. I noticed that the sink filled up mostly in the evenings when several people cooked around the same time, and the dishwasher had already filled earlier in the day. The issue wasn't behavior. The system simply broke when multiple people used it simultaneously. We introduced a simple rule: if the dishwasher is full before you start cooking, run it first. That small change removed most of the friction. What stood out to me wasn't just the solution, but how quickly the problem became clear once someone stepped back and looked at the system rather than the symptoms. In an in-house product role, the focus would likely be maintaining and gradually improving the system over time. For example, introducing new rules, reminders, or processes as issues appear. But what interested me the most in that situation was the diagnostic part. Stepping into a messy situation, identifying the constraints quickly, and implementing a small intervention that improved the entire system. That's what attracted me to the consulting model that Product People describes. Consultants bring an external perspective, which makes it easier to question assumptions that people inside the system may have normalized. In this case, everyone assumed the problem was people's behavior. Looking at the system itself revealed a much simpler solution. This answer shows 4 qualities that Product People values. 1. System thinking instead of blaming individuals. 2. Constraint identification. 3. External perspective. And 4. Small interventions with big impact. Notice how with every answer, I keep going back to the company mission and role description. This is intentional and it's the method you should use with every application. If you are experienced, here's how you could answer. A moment that made me realize I might enjoy product consulting more than traditional in-house product work happened while helping a local cafe owner deal with a load-shedding issue. The cafe kept losing revenue because customers would leave during power cuts. Owner assumed the solution was to invest in a larger generator. Before recommending that, I spent time observing what actually happened during outages. What I noticed was that the biggest issue wasn't electricity itself, it was uncertainty. Customers arrived, saw the lights off, assumed the cafe was closed, and left. The cafe could actually operate on a smaller generator for basic services. Instead of investing in an expensive equipment, the cafe placed a sign outside explaining that services continued during load shedding and added a simple update on their social media pages indicating when they were open despite outages. Customer traffic during outages improved almost immediately. What stood out to me was that the problem wasn't power but information clarity. That experience reinforced something I've seen repeatedly. Organizations often try to solve problems by adding more resources rather than identifying the real constraints. In an in-house role, I might have continued improving the cafe's operations, but the part I found most interesting was diagnosing the situation quickly and coming up with a simple solution. And this feels closer to the kind of work Product People describes. Why this answer is strong. It shows system thinking. I look beyond the obvious assumption. 2. Constraint identification. The real problem was information, not electricity. 3. Consulting mindset. A weak answer could look like this. I realized I'd enjoy product consulting more because it allows me to work on many different products and many industries. And why this is weak? It focuses on variety, not problem solving. Remember the job description. Product people hire a consultant who enjoy diagnosing messy environments and aligning teams quickly. So you need to be a problem solver. Question 4. You migrate the checkout flow to a new platform and there are minimal user experience changes. It has a negative 20 reduction in conversion rates compared to earlier. How would you diagnose and address this issue? I'll start with a strong answer assuming you had some experience. A migration with minimal visible changes but a 20% conversion drop suggests that the issue may not be design but the underlying system. I would approach this by treating the checkout as a system with multiple interacting components rather than assuming a single cause. Step 1. Confirming the signal. I would start by first analyzing whether the drop is real by looking at analytic events with actual transaction data. Next, I would compare behavioral signals before and after migration, such as time spent in checkout, field error rate, page load time, retry attempts, etc. A spike in retries or time spent may indicate hidden friction. Step 3. Investigating system differences. Even with identical UX or user experience, the new platform may have changed. It could be network latency, form validation logic, payment authorization timing, cookies or session handling, etc. These technical factors can significantly affect conversion. Step 4. Identifying the constraint rather than testing multiple fixes randomly. To do this, I would isolate the step where the largest behavioral change occurred. Once that constraint is identified, An experiment can then confirm whether the cause is usability, performance, or trust. Step 5. Preventing reoccurrences beyond fixing the current issue. I'll close by documenting what changed during the migration so future changes can include performance and conversion monitoring as part of release validation. Obviously, your answer doesn't have to be in steps. I did this because, again, I want to explain in detail. Why this is strong, it shows system diagnosis rather than feature thinking. It also focuses on root cause. Thirdly, the most important skill in any job really, learning mindset. I already included in the answer how I'll be using this incident to improve future decision making. What if you don't have any experience? Here's how you could answer. I would confirm the drop is real by comparing analytics data with back-end orders or payment processor transactions to identify exactly where the users dropped off. That step could reveal whether the issue is happening at payment submissions, form completion, or area in the flow. Next, I would investigate technical changes introduced by the new platform. Things like page load speed, payment getaway behavior, or session timeouts. Even small performance differences can significantly affect checkout conversions. Once the constraint is identified, I would prioritize targeted fixes or experiments rather than rolling back the entire migration. With either of these answers, you are showing structured diagnosis, technical awareness, user behavior analysis, experiment-driven fixes. If you were to answer in steps or at least something similar, it signals that you are someone who actually thought about the question, and this is what product people want. A weak answer could be something like, since the drop happened after the migration, I would roll back the old platform. With this, you are basically assuming and jumping into conclusion without any proper diagnosis or evaluation. Question 5. What is the most challenging aspect of your job and what strategies do you use to overcome it? Don't panic if you don't have a current job. I'll show you how you could answer. Strong answer, assuming you are currently not working or you don't have any experience. I'm currently not working, but one challenge I've noticed during my job search is how overwhelming and unstructured the process can feel. Many roles require similar skills, yet the way companies describe those skills varies widely, which makes it difficult to know how to position yourself effectively. At first, I approached applications reactively, applying to many roles without a clear strategy. Over time, I realized that the real challenge wasn't the number of applications, but understanding what employers were actually evaluating. To address this, I started analyzing job descriptions more systematically, identifying common patterns in the skills companies emphasized, and adjusting how I presented my experience or skills. Breaking the process into smaller steps, researching roles, understanding what problems companies are trying to solve, and tailoring applications accordingly has made the process far more manageable. That experience reinforced the importance of stepping back and understanding the system behind a problem before trying to solve it. Here's another strong answer if you're currently not working. Pause to read. Basically, with these answers, you are demonstrating outcome first thinking and pattern restructuring. Let's say you have some experience but maybe in a different industry. Here's a strong answer. One of the most challenging aspects of my work is dealing with competing priorities from different stakeholders. If every request is treated equally urgent, it becomes difficult to focus and progress slows. The strategy I use is to bring conversations back to the underlying objective. Instead of debating individual requests, I try to clarify what outcomes the team is actually trying to achieve. Once the objective is clear, it becomes easier to evaluate which actions meaningfully contribute to that outcome and which ones can wait. This approach reduces unnecessary debates and helps focus on work that has greatest impact. With this answer, you can even add an example of how you did this in the past just to support it. Why it's strong? It shows decision making, stakeholder alignment, and strategic thinking. Those are highly transferable skills, and product people is looking for those skills. Here's another strong answer if you are working a non-product job. Pause to read. Weak answer for this question could be something like, I'm not currently working and the hardest part is feeling uncertain about the future. Why this is weak, it focuses on feelings instead of problem solving, and it doesn't demonstrate how you handle challenges. Question 6. Which statement do you agree with more? Select A. The rules should always be followed. B. Sometimes you need to break the rules to get the job done. When a company gives you options and it's not a multiple choice test, there is usually no correct or wrong answer. What they want to see is your reasoning for choosing the option you chose. So both these options can be chosen, but how you substantiate matters. Some companies ask you to substantiate your answer in the same application, but if you do not see that space, it doesn't necessarily mean they're just gonna let you go. Once you progress to the next stage, which is the interview, they will most likely ask you why you chose that answer. Choosing option A doesn't mean you are rigid. If you are leaning toward this option, it may be that you typically think in terms of system stability. So how can you justify it if you choose A? Here's what you could say. I generally believe rules should be followed because they often represent lessons learned from past mistakes and complex systems where rules create stability. If a rule seems inefficient, I prefer to challenge it openly and improve the system rather than bypassing it quietly. That way, the system becomes better for everyone instead of relying on individuals making exceptions. With this answer, you are basically communicating system integrity, predictability, and responsibility. But what if you are leaning towards option B? Again, start by trying to understand what this choice reflects, because if you don't understand, you can't defend it. Option B reflects that rules are approximations, not absolute truths. They are designed for typical situations, but reality sometimes presents cases that rules didn't anticipate. If you select this option, it may be that you believe the real responsibility is achieving the objective, not just following the procedure or procedures. Here's how you could justify that choice. Rules are important because they create structure, but they are usually designed for the most common situations. In complex environments, you occasionally encounter situations the rules wasn't designed for. In those cases, I think the responsible approach is to understand the intent of the rule, make a thoughtful decision based on the outcome you are trying to achieve, and then communicate transparently about the decision. That way, you solve the immediate problem while also helping improve the system for the future. With this answer, you are highlighting judgment, adaptability, and outcome-driven thinking. It shows that you are comfortable navigating uncertain situations or environments. Question 7. At work, you see yourself more as select an innovator, a user-client advocate. You choose option A, it may mean that you are just someone who gets energized by questions like, how could this work better? Why do we do it this way? What hasn't been tried yet? If you choose this option and you are required to defend either in the application or in the next stage, which is the interview, here's how you could substantiate. I tend to see myself as an innovator because I'm naturally drawn to improving how things work. When I encounter systems or processes that feel inefficient, my instinct is to ask whether there is a simpler or better way to achieve the same outcome. But what if you are leaning towards B or you want to choose option B? Choosing option B means you are probably someone who prioritizes understanding and representing the needs of the people who use the product or service. So to defend your answer, you could say something like, I tend to see myself as a user advocate because I naturally think about how decisions affect people who actually use the product or service. When teams become more focused on internal goals or technical improvements, it's easy to lose sight of the user's perspective. I try to make sure that the user's needs remain central to decision making because ultimately the success of any product depends on whether it genuinely solves their problem. So you see, there is no superior or inferior answer here. As long as you can defend yourself, you can choose either option. Question 8. How would you improve the above questionnaire? Add, remove, or change? They are probably checking whether you can analyze a system you've just experienced, identify what works and what doesn't, and then propose thoughtful improvements. So the goal is not to criticize the questionnaire harshly or say it was well, there's nothing to improve. This is another opportunity to show that you think like a product manager or product consultant. A strong answer for this can follow these 3 main points. 1. Acknowledge what works well. 2. Identify one or two improvements. 3. Explain why those changes improve the experience. Here's an example of how you could answer. Overall, the questionnaire does a good job of evaluating how candidates think rather than testing memorized product knowledge. The questions encourage structured reasoning, which I find valuable for roles where ambiguity is common. One improvement I might suggest is a short case question that requires prioritization between competing initiatives. Many product challenges involve deciding what not to do, and prioritization scenario could reveal how we as candidates balance user needs, business impacts, and technical constraints. But also consider allowing slightly more space for elaboration on some questions.